Hello again. Um, I decided to make a video about Buddha and Buddhism and my thoughts on Buddha and Buddhism, and always referring to my own realization and speaking from that because that seems to work best. Um, in fact, it sounds more authentic when I do that. Seeing my own older videos, I noticed that comes over more as more authentic. I've been looking into Buddhism the last weeks for some reason. It came up in me, and Buddha has been a very, very powerful influence in my life, my spiritual path, for a number of years. Um, but by no means my whole spiritual career. In the last years, I had precious little to do with Buddhism. But what I realized is Buddha's teachings and Buddha's influence is very important in this respect, that it emphasizes the moral or ethical side of human conduct and human intercourse. Important. My main input has been from Advaita Vedanta, the last decade and a half, 3 decades, in fact. I left Buddhism behind because I got depressed. I found it to be oppressive and overly mental. Or, you know, and to this day, my opinion, having revisited Buddhism, my opinion on Buddhism as a body, as a corpus, is the same. What I see Buddhists as well. There's some very enlightened teachers, but by and large, Buddhists in the West, Buddhism has taken the world by storm and is a very, very, great power to be contended with here in the West. It has a tremendous influence in the West. But there's a preponderance of mind, conceptualism, and that takes you away from the immediacy of the clear light of consciousness, clear light of awareness, which is only really represented by a handful of traditions within modern Buddhism. And in fact, even in the original teachings of the Buddha, the Theravadan tradition, arahantship. Having revisited, I realized that that's really all Buddha was telling people to do, exhorting them to, through introspection and meditation and contemplation of the Noble Truth, to realize nirvana or jhana in Pali, which is jnana. You have in Hinduism the tradition of jnana yoga, jnana marg, the path of knowledge, which is what Advaita Vedanta is about. And the greatest dispute between the Advaita Vedanta tradition and Buddhism, I've seen a number of very good videos from swamis and teachers who have successfully resolved this dichotomy. Among them is Swami Sarvapriyananda, who's done a couple of excellent lectures on Buddhism and Advaita, comparing the two, and even just about Buddhism itself. He's very knowledgeable on the subject. As I say, I don't have a tradition. I don't have a lineage of swamis or teachers like he does, or like as I call them, the Saffron Sampradaya. Great though they are, they're great luminaries of our time. I don't have that to fall back on. I only have my own realization, and I speak from my heart, and exactly what my unique insights I share. The interesting and rather outrageous revelation I'm going to make is that Buddha pulled a con trick. Why do I say that? Because before the Buddha, there was no Buddha. Buddha, Gautama Siddhartha, the sage, basically recreated himself and promoted himself. The idea of the Buddha was a form of self-promotion, you could say, and a way to promote himself as an alternative to the Vedic gods of his time. So by dispensing with Vedas and the Vedic gods, Indra, Brahma, and all the rest of them, he recreated himself as a sort of supernatural being with superior qualities, thereby setting the a standard, raising the mark, the benchmark, the setting the standard for human striving. So he genuinely considered himself superior to all other beings. So that has created a top-down kind of hierarchy from which all systems within Buddhism have evolved throughout its history. It's a very rich and varied history, and caused a number of schisms. No doubt he was an extremely powerful teacher and an enlightened human being who was who made a great mark on history. And this is the interesting thing, because it struck me also that how Buddhism differs from all other religions, with perhaps the exception of Christianity, and even Judaism to some extent, they share this in common with Buddhism, is it places the human being as central. The human being and human suffering is central, and how to relieve human suffering. So it's very pragmatic, very practical. It's not about propitiating gods and goddesses in order to get boons or get salvation, but focusing on the human experience and trying to extricate oneself from the human condition. And in that sense, it was unique and rather, a daring experiment, which certainly helped him to realize enlightenment, nirvana, and also many of his followers. That's not to say he was the only enlightened teacher, but he proposed that his path is the best one. Others also achieved nirvana, like his contemporary Mahavira, who founded the Jainism, and sages before him in the Upanishadic tradition of Vedic religion, Vedantic sages. So he certainly doesn't have the monopoly on enlightenment or liberation, moksha. Vimukti, it's called in Buddhism. Vimukti in Hinduism is called Jivanmukti. And upon closer inspection, the differences between non-dual traditions in Hinduism and Buddhism are negligible. And I think a number of teachers have now, such as Swami Sarvapriyananda, have beautifully elucidated that fact. So anyway, returning to this outrageous statement which I made, which you can verify for yourself. The Buddha basically recreated himself as a larger-than-life sort of cosmic figure in order to attract followers, people to follow him. Undoubtedly, he had many powers, siddhis, idhis in Pali, siddhis, that helped him to do that, and a pleasing appearance and so forth. Maybe he was just chosen by God or by the universe, through providence, divine favor, or what have you, being at the right place at the right time, the right person. But the fact is, if you inspect Buddhism and his claims about the Buddhas before him, there were 12 or 24 Buddhas, I don't know exactly how many, who preceded him. The claims are impossible to verify. He claimed that these Buddhas lived, the last one was one of them, Dipankara Buddha, lived eons and eons before him. And in Buddhism, the kalpa, or eon, is measured in such a way. If a rock which is 10 cubits by 10 cubits, the time it takes for a rock, 10 cubits by 10 cubits, or a very large rock, to be eroded away by somebody taking a silk cloth and stroking it over that rock once every 100 years. The time that elapsed before that rock is completely eroded away is one eon, one kalpa in Buddhism. So Dipankara Buddha existed kalpas and kalpas, thousands of kalpas before Buddha. The earth is only 4.5 billion years old. So I find that a rather improbable claim. The other interesting thing is that he was, I think, 100 cubits tall, which is 37 meters. Okay, So I think that's highly unlikely that any such being actually existed. If there's historical evidence for Dipankara Buddha, I'd like Buddhists to come forward and show us. It's quite similar to the claims of his rival Mahavira, Vardhaman Niganta Nataputta, that there were 24 tirthankaras who are in the Jain tradition who preceded Mahavira, who was the last tirthankara. And that's a time, they had timelines and going into quintillions of years, which is absolutely absurd. So both the Buddhas and the tirthankaras belong to the realm of fantasy. It was fantasy land. And so important to take this into account. I mean, I think quite important. Why is it important? Because people tend to put Buddha on a pedestal, like they do Jesus. And I've demonstrated in my videos similar things with Jesus and Muhammad, that absurd claims can in no way, they're so fatuous and so ridiculous. They do not, they don't accord with reality. And so they can be discounted, quite frankly. And you should just take reality, the reality of your own experience and your own insights about experience as real. And there's plenty of teachings, including Buddha's teachings, which can help you to form your own, help you forge your own path by knowing what you're looking for. If it's liberation, then surely your sincere desire for liberation will lead you to that goal, the attainment of that goal. Anyway, so the problem being putting somebody on a pedestal has created the whole of the Buddhist world, and it is a world within itself. It's a bubble. This is an interesting anomaly to contemplate. In the Buddhist world, there are no tirthankaras. The tirthankaras are the Jain Buddhas, and if you look at the iconography of Jainism, the tirthankaras look like Buddhas. I don't know who copied who, but it's quite possible that the iconography of Jainism was adopted by Buddhists when they made the statues of the Buddha. When I first saw these statues of the Tirthankara, I thought that looks like a Buddha. But it's not a Buddha, it's a Tirthankara. And I had a difficulty in discerning that. Fact is that Buddha was influenced by Mahavira and his contemporaries, known as the Shramanas, of whom there were 6, with varying and different points of view. Some of them were extreme ascetics, others were skeptics, others were fatalists, determinists, others were atomists. Their names are, and Buddha either studied with them or was aware of them, and in the writings of Buddhists was quite disparaging about them. One of them, Sanjay Belatiputta, who was a skeptic, he referred to as an eel-wriggler. The Shramanas' names, by the way, you can check in the link, the Wikipedia link. There was Purana Kashyapa, Ajit, Kesha Kambalin, Makali Goshala, Pakuta Kachayana, Mahavira, Nataputta, Nataputta, Niganta Nataputta, and Sanjay Belatiputta. And those are the 6 Shramanas. And as I say, there's a concept of dependent origination within Buddhism, which is basically cause and effect. Nothing rises in a vacuum. So Buddha could very much be seen as a product of these different teaching influences. And there are a couple of other teachers who are not mentioned, who are influential on him. And he very shrewdly discovered this path, which was, promoting this self-promotion of himself as this mythical entity, this Tathagata, superior being. And he was able to attract the sponsorship of the merchant class by promoting the middle way. Basically 2 different sort of strands of his teachings. One was ethical self-improvement aspect, becoming a better person through practicing ethical virtues, compassion, loving kindness, truth, and so forth. And that would have appealed to the merchant class who wanted to improve themselves. And the other teachings, which is that would have later morphed into the bodhisattva ideal of Mahayana Buddhism. And then you had the introverted practice, Jnana, meditation, the arahantship, the becoming an arahant and attaining liberation, Vimukti. And that's obviously that was for the hardcore practitioners, the monks. And that's resulted in the stratification of the Buddhist society, which is present in all Buddhist countries, virtually all Buddhist countries. The monastics at the top, the upper tier, the religious caste, and the lower caste lay people. So this artificial dichotomy was created within Buddhism, which has, continued to this day, and all Buddhist countries display this two-tier society, organization of society. Very shrewd he was, and he got much more popular, became much more popular than the materialists, annihilationists like Ajit Kesha Kambalin. It was a much more fluffy and cuddly, approachable Dharma teaching. From Marx to him for that, his teachings have touched everyone in the world. Quite remarkable. And but as I said, it's a very shrewd, what you call it, business move, piece of business strategy to cut into the market of the Vedic seers by creating himself into a godlike being, and very cleverly marketing himself as a paragon to follow, as the authority on Dharma, and superior to all the other. But as I say, that can be like a noose around your neck. That can be a great weight. Having somebody like that, who you then pedestalize, and then you tend to belittle yourself and measure yourself against that standard. And it's a good ideal to strive to. Certainly, it's good that Buddha is there, but if you belittle yourself, you're not going to get anywhere. He also does recommend that you love yourself, but he's always there as a specter, you see. Then there's the doctrine of no self. You don't exist. So I remember becoming very depressed following Buddhism, and it went on for a number of years that I couldn't make any headway in my Buddhist practice. I practiced Buddhist meditation, and I had a very early experience in my meditation practice where I had a heart opening and a tremendous influx of epiphany of universal love and compassion towards all beings after practicing metta bhavana, loving kindness meditation at the Covent Garden meditation center. There was a place where there were weekly meditation sessions, and it was a real eye-opener. It got me completely hooked on Buddhism. This was in the early, mid-80s, around 1984, 1985. And I went babbling through the streets on the underground and the metro, talking to strangers and outflowing my loving kindness to them. That had the influence of that continued for a number of weeks. But after that, it was a desert. I never made any progress with Buddhism, and I tried to join a Buddhist community where I practiced this meditation. And the Friends of the Western Buddhists, or the Three Ratna Foundation, which started in Britain. And I didn't make any headway and became more and more depressed. And I could feel that there was something about that which was oppressive, as if one had to, forget oneself or denigrate oneself and worship the Buddha, pedestalize, and that's wrong. You have to investigate and accept the self, yourself, what you take yourself to be, before you can make any progress. Once you've completely accepted yourself, warts and all, you can actually investigate what your self is and find the deeper self, the clear light of awareness that you actually are, and attain at least awakening. Liberation proper, as happened with me, is an act of grace or an accident, as I explained in an earlier video, and very few people attain that. So that's another thing about Buddhism. It's a massive experiment with lots of people, summum bonum is to become a monk. And that's the highest form of human life. According to Buddhists, the monk has a superior status to the layperson, and I think that's an artificial thing. And look how many monks there have been. How many of them have actually become enlightened? How many have actually become enlightened? Relatively few individuals throughout history have become enlightened. It's not for everybody, certainly not. As I say, they have this continual specter of the Buddha as an unattainable ideal. And when you have an unattainable ideal, you are projecting and giving power to that and forgetting yourself. The 13th man, as it's called in Advaita. You have to focus on the self. And unfortunately, what's prevalent nowadays with the Dalai Lama and Vajrayana and Mahayana Buddhism being more prominent in the Western world and throughout the world, with Theravada Buddhism, disparagingly referred to as Hinayana, being relegated to the younger brother, the smaller vehicle, as something selfish. You see, this is the distinction with Mahayana Buddhism. After the Great Schism, Mahayana Buddhism came about and exalted the ethos of the bodhisattva ideal. And I think this is quite honestly a ridiculous proposition, which was not part of the original teachings of the historical Buddha. The idea that a bodhisattva is somebody who postpones their own enlightenment for the sake of saving myriad of sentient beings. And if you can just look at the ridiculousness of that proposition, you don't get rid of suffering. You only create more suffering because you create more rebirth. You have to keep on being reborn, and rebirth is suffering. So you keep being reborn in order to save more beings. So you're creating more pain in order to save people who are in pain. So it's a kind of self-defeating activity. Plus, there's an elitism and a snobbery about it, which I think is misplaced. It's not superior, the path of the bodhisattva. The arhat, which is the enlightened individual, in the original teachings of Buddha, is the original message of the Buddha, and I think that needs to be stated. And the original message of the Buddha was, his core teachings, just like with Jesus perhaps, in the Gnostic teachings of Jesus, was to realize enlightenment, realize liberation from the cycle of rebirth, to end and cease suffering. Very practical. Okay. In so doing, you are alleviating the suffering of many myriad beings. Look what happened to the Buddha himself. By becoming enlightened, he was able to help myriad of beings. He didn't say, I'm going to postpone my enlightenment till... So why would anyone do that? I think Vajrayana and Mahayana teachings are setting a false example. As I said, the Buddha taught Jnana yoga. Through dhyana, meditation, one experiences various states of meditative absorption until liberating insight is achieved, and one finally transcends the separate self, the ego consciousness, and realizes no self, that there is no self. But actually there is an awareness called bodhi or sati, the Buddha Nirvana. It shares this in common with Advaita Vedanta. The differences between the Advaita and Buddhism are negligible. they are essentially achieving the same thing, mukti, vimukti. Well, yeah, the bodhisattva ideal, very noble and no doubt helps a lot of people. It helps people who are in, consider themselves selfish, and they're already identified with the false self. So actually practicing things, virtues, can help them to loosen that ego structure and become more loving. And through love, the hard shell of the ego, which is completely illusory, of course, but it is a shell, the isolation from the rest of humanity and from the world. That's what the ego is. It's like a shell, hard eggshell. And enlightenment of nirvana, I compare it to the breaking of the shell. That hard shell, which is what one took oneself to be, is shattered. And that which is within, that fluid substance, is what you want to call it, Buddha nature, Brahman, Atman, awareness. That's what you really are. And that's liberated. And all those pieces, they're just gone. They're no longer defining you. You are no longer that hard shell that is fighting reality. Yeah. So where were we? As I say, despite the fact that Buddha may have pulled a fast one by creating this, fantastic cosmology, non-existent cosmology of Buddhas and for innumerable kalpas in the past. And then you've got, as I said, Dipankara Buddha and all this stuff. Despite that, his Four Noble Truths stand as pillars of spiritual a foundation for spiritual practice, I would say. The Four Noble Truths, which basically elucidate the fact that suffering is caused by craving, aversion, and attachment and aversion, and that the method is to relieve that suffering is through meditation. So that can help a lot of people to know that, because once you get on the meditative path, then you're really on the right path. So you have made the decision to turn within and look for the source and transcend all the aspects of mind, the five aggregates, as it is called in Buddhism, and see yourself for what you already are, which is clear light of awareness. These things are beautifully, I like directness, I like direct path, and usually suffering, immense suffering, is what goads one to find a direct path to realization. You don't want to hang around. You don't want to spend lifetimes coming back and rebirth. You're only interested in one thing. You want to get free. And that's why direct traditions like Dzogchen, which I was blessed enough to discover, within Buddhism, I would recommend these as the go-to for every Buddhist. In fact, should study Dzogchen and the clear perfection. And in the Zen tradition, Dogen, the Hongaku, the original Enlightenment teachings. This is also talking about your Buddha nature. Liberation is realizable here and now. There's no preparation needed. You simply see through liberating insight who and what you are, and you're free. And I've gone into this in my videos, and that should cover it really. Let's see. Interesting insight I had, the Buddha is all about peace and loving kindness and gentleness and soft speech and good, being well spoken. Yet it produced quite some quite violent extremist sects like Zen Buddhism, Buddha Dhamma, quite an extremist. He was into serious self-harm. He cut off his eyelids in order to stay awake. Then you have in Zen, Rinzai Zen, Roshis will, the teacher, will, the Zen master will hit the students with a stick to wake them up. And then you've got Kung Fu. Kung Fu is really quite violent, really. So it's rather ironic that should be come out of Buddhism. And again, I think that's the psychology behind that is because they put Buddha as once you put the Buddha, somebody so high on a pedestal, there's bound to be frustration within the self, within the personality, at that unattainable ideal, and that has to be channeled somewhere. So the people who developed Kung Fu were channeling their frustration about into these martial arts forms, and so having a paragon which you're continuously comparing yourself with and always falling short means you get into a kind of self-hatred cycle. It can happen that you start to despise yourself because you're not good enough, and that's the real problem, is not accepting yourself. The Buddha spoke about this as well. Self-love, accepting yourself is very important. But I think, it's a good thing for Buddhists to go back to the original teachings of the Buddha. I was downloaded a very, very good English translation of the Nikaya Suttas and really pore over what the Buddha actually said. And Buddhism needs to do some spring cleaning and get rid of all these concepts. So many teachers came after Buddha, and they had to cut through. They're basic people like Nagarjuna, who had to, who was a great logician. He had to cut through all the crap, all these concepts, long Sanskrit words and terms, and philosophical, what do you call it? Like a dog chasing its tail. So much sophistication, mental mentalism, that you lose the essence of what the teaching is lost. So it's a good thing that Dzogchen and other such direct paths are there, and they're very similar to Advaita Vedanta. Or you don't even need a teacher. You can just look for yourself, find your own way. That's another way. Those are called Buddhas in Buddhism, who have no teacher. But I had a teacher, I must admit. There's no harm in having a teacher. Let's see. That's another observation. The first schism of in Buddhism, insight came to me. The schism within Buddhism that created the Mahayana was caused by a monk called Mahadeva. And Mahadeva, interestingly enough, is the name of the Hindu god Shiva, the destroyer, the third person of the Trinity. Mahadeva, Shiva is also called Mahadev. And interestingly enough, after the schism, the influence of Tantrism, which is basically Shaivism and Shaktism, elements from Shiva and Yogi, the yogic tradition, and the Shaiva and Shakta traditions came into Buddhism. And the hilarious story is that Mahadeva accused Arhants, the venerable bhikkhus, of not being completely enlightened, or their realization as being inauthentic, because they still suffered from nocturnal emissions. So they would ejaculate in their sleep, which to him was proof that they weren't truly enlightened, because they hadn't conquered desire. So that was his spurious argument, and he claimed that there were Mahayana scripture, teachings of the Buddha, which came after his death from another realm, a divine realm, and that's the basis of the Mahayana tradition, which is interesting, isn't it? So I think that's all a big fraud, to be honest. Although no doubt the Mahayanist teachings and sutras are very powerful as well, and they have the ability to confer awakening insight. But the fact is rather strange. The whole schism within the first century after Christ, the first synod and the second synod, and the great schism within Buddhism happened. In a similar way in Christianity, schism happened. And you have this similar sort of dynamic going on in Christianity. The two had a parallel evolution, you might even say, Buddhism and Christianity. You had the faith by works and faith through grace alone, or faith. Salvation through works and salvation through faith alone. So you've got the bodhisattva ideal, salvation through works, serving sentient beings, alleviating the suffering. And you have salvation through faith, through grace, through meditation, although it's slightly different. I can give you the example of the two popes. You've got Pope Francis, who's a great sort of, philanthropically, charitable and always busy, active, alleviating the suffering of the congregation and pointing out that service to fellow human beings is the most important thing. And his predecessor, Pope Benedict, who the emphasis was more on seclusion, meditation, and finding the path to unity with God in daily life. And that he used as his basis for action. And many critics of Francis say that he's veered from the true teachings of Christ, which were more like what Pope Benedict, his predecessor, was practicing, and monks in like Trappist monks. What are the names of those monks? Carthusian monks. Silence, seclusion, eschewing contact with the world, and finding unity with God or Buddha. So that would be the path of the Arahant or the Gnostic. And Pope Francis was very disparaging, actually, of Gnostics, who also follow the path of introversion and meditation. In a similar way to perhaps the Dalai Lama, who intimates that people who are, practice introversion and meditation and seek liberation are basically being selfish. That's the feeling I get from him. Although he's a marvelous person and all the rest of it, and does great work. But he lives in the world for people, and as long as you live for people, that just suits certain types of characters, people who are relational. That's the feminine. He's an incarnation of Chenrezig, Avalokiteshvara, Kuan Yin. So that's the feminine, the relational. That's the path of relationship, and not the path of introversion or gnosis. That's bhakti, you call it bhakti yoga in Hinduism, and jnana yoga is introversion. The problem comes when people who follow this bodhisattva altruistic ideal start to point the finger and say that those who are following the path of knowledge and introversion and introspection, that they are selfish. And that's wrong, and you shouldn't do that. I'm just saying that that's criticism I have of the Dalai Lama, and there are many. I can make a whole video about Dalai Lama and what's going on in Vajrayana Buddhism, but perhaps I will, perhaps I won't. That's my thoughts on Buddhism, basically. I think I achieved, I always say Nirvana attained me. I never attained Nirvana. Nirvana attained me. It happened through my own efforts and through my own unique path, which I described in earlier videos. And I'm reminded of how I managed to break free, finally, gradually break free of the influence of the Buddha and walk my own path. And that was after reading Hermann Hesse's Siddhartha, the novel Siddhartha, in which the protagonist was following the Buddha for a while and would attend his discourses, and finally decided to go his own way, ended up on a riverbank meeting another seer, a sage, and listening to the water, became enlightened. So the enlightenment, whatever path is for you, wherever life takes you, I must say that I found, in that sense, Taoism and the Tao Te Ching very liberating after Buddhism. And I followed that for many years. Much freer, much more natural. Not the idea that you have to conform to a certain ideal, but simply be yourself. And Tao is what one realizes. Tao and Taoism had a great influence on Zazen, which is another direct path, original Zen, original Enlightenment teachings, Hongaku, Zazen of Dogen. That's another one I would recommend people. Always take the path which feels right for you. Some people are in a hurry to get enlightened because the suffering is too much. If you're not suffering, then you have no incentive to become liberated, really, and then you'll delay it to the next life. And who knows? What else we got here? Dzogchen. And that's about all I wanted to say about Buddhism. Yeah, the shamanas. Yeah. Well, I wish you a very nice day, and I hope you got something from this. Good day.